Chapter 1. The night I realized I was already erased. I found out my family erased me on Christmas night, not with shouting, not with betrayal you can see, but with paperwork signed behind my back. While they toasted the new year, my name was quietly removed, legally, cleanly, like I had never built anything at all. I am Marin, and this is the story of how silence, evidence, and one room full of people finally exposed a betrayal no one thought would come back to haunt them. I knew something was wrong before I could name it, the way you know a storm is coming when the air turns too still. New Year's Eve always did that to me. It made everyone act like they were stepping into a cleaner version of themselves, as if one night could rinse away a whole year of quiet disappointments. We were at my husband's parents' house in a tidy neighborhood outside Raleigh, the kind where every porch light matched and every wreath looked professionally fluffed. Inside, the warmth was aggressive, too much cinnamon in the air, too many candles, too many voices competing to sound happy. I had brought a cheesecake I did not have time to make, purchased on the way over, with my name written on the label in a looping script that felt like a lie. I carried it in like an offering anyway. My name is Marin Caldwell. I am 43 years old. I used to be the person who ran operations for a regional freight company, the person who knew every driver by name, every route by heart, every late fee and every loophole. Then I married Pierce, and I slowly became the person who handled everything that made his life look effortless. I told myself it was partnership. I told myself it was love. I told myself it was temporary. Pierce stood near the fireplace, smiling like a man who had never apologized and never needed to. He looked good in a charcoal sweater that probably cost more than my first car payment, his hair still thick, his watch catching the light every time he lifted his glass. People liked Pierce. They liked the way he listened with his eyes, the way he made them feel important, the way he spoke about growth and expansion as if he were talking about weather. Lorraine, my mother-in-law, floated through the room like she owned the air itself. She was 72 and she wore pearls that never moved, not even when she laughed. She hugged me with a firm arm and a light touch, like she was testing whether I would crumble. "There she is," Lorraine announced to the room, "our Marin, always so dependable." Dependable. That word followed me through the house like a leash. The dinner table was dressed like a magazine spread, linen napkins folded into sharp angles, candles centered in a mirrored runner, crystal glasses lined up like soldiers. Pierce poured wine for his father, for Lorraine, for his sister, for her husband, for the neighbor couple who came every year. When he poured for me, he did not look at my face. He slid my glass across the table with 2 fingers, like it was an object he was being polite to. Everyone asked me the same questions they always asked, the safe ones that required no real answer. How is work? Are you staying busy? How is the traffic these days? I nodded, I smiled, I said things like, "Yes, it has been a full season," as if my life could be summarized like a quarterly report. What I did not say was that I had just pulled off the biggest contract our company had ever seen. Northline Freight Solutions, the company Pierce built on paper and I built in real life, had landed a multi-year deal with a medical supplier that would keep us stable through 2026. I had negotiated every detail, the service levels, the penalties, the contingency plan for winter delays. I had done it while packing lunches, while paying bills, while reminding Pierce about his own meetings. I had done it quietly, because that was what I did. Halfway through dinner, Pierce was talking about expansion again, about adding another warehouse, about hiring a new director of operations. I felt a flicker of pride, the kind that rises before you remember you are not allowed to show it. I cleared my throat. I actually finalized the MedSer contract this morning, I said, and my voice sounded too soft in the bright room, like it belonged to someone who had not earned the right to interrupt. Pierce did not miss a beat. He smiled at his father and said, "We'll talk business later." It was not cruel. That was the problem. It was casual, smooth, effortless. It carried the message without needing to raise the volume. Not now, not here, not you. A few people nodded like that made sense. Lorraine lifted her glass and said something about keeping the conversation light. Someone asked about vacation plans. The room moved on. I felt my cheeks warm, not from embarrassment, but from something heavier, something older. I swallowed it. I cut my chicken. I smiled when someone made a joke. I kept my hands steady. After dinner, I carried plates into the kitchen without being asked, because there are habits you don't even question anymore. Lorraine joined me, drying her hands with a towel that matched her outfit. She didn't need to help. She simply liked to be present when things were being handled. The living room hummed with music and laughter. A football game played on mute. The neighbor couple was telling a story that made everyone laugh too loudly. Pierce stood with his sister near the bar cart, their heads close in a way that made them look like co-conspirators. Lorraine leaned toward her friend Janice, who had followed her into the kitchen to refill a drink. She did not lower her voice enough. "Everything is finally clean for the new year," Lorraine said, and she smiled like she had just said something wholesome. Janice clinked her glass against Lorraine's. "About time," she replied. Lorraine glanced at me then, just for a second. Her eyes were bright and calm and completely unreadable. I turned to the sink and ran water over a plate that didn't need rinsing, just to give my hands something to do. Clean. That word landed in my chest like cold metal. Clean paperwork, clean lines, clean separation. I told myself it meant nothing. Lorraine loved to talk like that. She loved the language of order, the language of things being put in their place. She had been a school administrator for decades. She treated people the same way she treated schedules, as problems to organize. Still, my stomach tightened. Later, when everyone was back in the living room waiting for midnight, I went down the hallway to look for more napkins. The house was quiet back there, the lights dimmer, the air cooler. I passed Pierce's father's study, a room that smelled like leather and old books. The door was cracked. On the desk, under a lamp, sat a thick envelope, cream-colored paper, sharp edges, a return address printed in neat block letters. A law firm logo was stamped in the corner. I recognized it because I had seen it before on documents Pierce told me were routine. I couldn't read the full name from the hallway, but I knew the look of it, official, expensive, certain. I didn't step inside. I didn't pick it up. I didn't open it. Something in me refused the drama of that moment. Instead, I stood there for one breath, then two, then I walked away like I had never seen it. Back in the living room, the lights were low and the television counted down to midnight. Everyone had a drink. Everyone found a place. Couples leaned into each other. Pierce's sister draped an arm around her husband. Lorraine took Pierce's father's hand. Even Janice had her fingers linked with the neighbor man like they had practiced. I stood in the middle of the room with my glass of champagne, and no one reached for me. Not Pierce, not Lorraine, not anyone. Pierce was 2 steps away, laughing at something his sister said. His shoulder brushed mine and he didn't notice, or he noticed and chose not to acknowledge it. Either way, the absence was the same. 10, the television voice announced. I looked at Pierce's hand, relaxed at his side, and I waited, still believing in a reflex that should have been automatic after 17 years of marriage. 9. Lorraine leaned forward, smiling, her pearls catching the light. 8. My throat tightened. I could taste something sharp behind my teeth, like pennies. 7. I glanced around the room and realized I was not a person in the scene. I was a piece of furniture, useful, silent, expected to stay in place. 6. Pierce lifted his glass. He did not look at me. 5. I felt the thought form in my mind with a clarity that scared me. I am not in the circle anymore. 4. My chest hurt in a quiet way, the way it hurts when you have carried something too long and your body finally admits it. 3, 2, 1. Happy New Year, everyone shouted. Glasses clinked, someone kissed. Lorraine laughed. Pierce hugged his sister. His father slapped his back. No one kissed me. No one held my face. No one said my name. I smiled anyway, because that is what you do when you do not want anyone to see you bleeding. A few minutes later, while the room swelled with noise, I picked up empty glasses and carried them into the kitchen. The sink was full. The dishwasher door hung open. The house smelled like sugar and wine, and something burned. I stood alone under the bright kitchen white, and I let the quiet settle in my bones. I did not cry. I did not break anything. I did not march back in there demanding answers. I rinsed the glasses one by one. I lined them up on the counter. I folded napkins that did not need folding. I watched my own hands move as if they belonged to someone else. Then I dried my fingers on a towel and made a decision so small it barely looked like a decision at all. I would not confront Pierce tonight. I would not ask Lorraine what she meant. I would not charge into that study and tear open that envelope. I would watch. I would listen. I would remember every word, every pause, every glance that did not reach me. And when the truth finally surfaced, I would already be standing in the right place to see it. Chapter 2. The betrayal was perfectly legal. The morning after New Year's felt like a house after a party, not messy, just empty out. The glitter had been swept away, the candles were gone, and whatever warmth people pretended to share the night before had cooled into something brittle. I woke up in the guest room to the sound of a coffee grinder downstairs. The sheets smelled like lavender detergent and someone else's idea of comfort. For a few seconds I lay still, listening, trying to decide if I had imagined the whole thing, the way no one reached for my hand, the way my name disappeared from the room without anyone noticing. Then I remembered the envelope on the desk, the law firm logo, the clean edges. I dressed quietly, jeans and a sweater, hair pulled back without thinking. In the mirror, my face looked the same, but the part of me that usually softened things for other people was gone. I went downstairs and found Pierce in the living room, not the kitchen. That alone told me it was planned. He was sitting on the edge of the leather chair, elbows on his knees, hands clasped. His coffee sat untouched on the side table. The television was off. The curtains were open, letting in that gray winter light that makes everything look like it has been drained. Lorraine sat on the sofa, upright, ankles crossed, hands folded in her lap. She looked dressed for a luncheon, not a Wednesday morning. Her pearls were on again, of course. Pierce looked up when I entered, and he smiled like he was trying to reassure a client. "Marin," he said, "sit down for a minute." I stayed standing. He cleared his throat. "We need to talk calmly, okay? No drama." Lorraine nodded once, like a judge granting permission. I heard my own voice come out flat. "I am calm." Pierce's father was in the room too, Everett. He stood near the window with his mug, staring out at the backyard, where frost clung to the grass. He did not turn around. He did not acknowledge me. He might as well have been part of the furniture. Pierce gestured toward the sofa. "Please." I sat, not because I wanted to, but because I could feel Lorraine watching for any sign of resistance. I could feel Pierce waiting to label my reaction. Pierce said, "I want you to understand this is not personal." Lorraine added, "It is practical." Pierce shot her a quick look, the kind that said, "Let me handle this." Then he looked back at me. He said, "Northline had to be restructured at the end of the year. We needed a cleaner operating agreement, new protections, the kind investors expect." I felt my throat tighten, but I kept my face still. I said, "You mean the deal I just closed, the one that would make investors feel safe?" Pierce gave a small laugh that did not reach his eyes. He said, "Yes, and that deal is exactly why this matters. We cannot have blurred authority when we grow." Lorraine leaned forward slightly. "Growth requires clarity." I looked at Everett, hoping, stupidly, that he might turn around and say something like, "This is too much," or at least look at me like a human being. He lifted his mug and took a slow sip. His eyes stayed on the window. Pierce reached for a folder on the coffee table and slid it toward me. The paper inside looked thick, official, expensive. He said, "The restructuring was completed in December, last quarter. It was done legally. This is for the best." My hands did not move. I stared at the folder like it might bite me. I said, "Completed how?" Pierce inhaled slowly, like he had rehearsed this exact moment. He said, "The LLC membership was reorganized. The voting units were adjusted. The signature authority is now limited to the managing member." I blinked once. "And who is the managing member?" Pierce said, "I am." Lorraine said, "Of course he is." I could feel heat under my skin, not anger yet, more like a sudden rush of shame, as if I had missed something obvious and everyone else had been watching me fail. I kept my voice even. "And me?" Pierce hesitated just a fraction, and that hesitation told me more than the words that followed. He said, "You are not on the operating agreement anymore." I stared at him. I said, "Not on it anymore? Like I was ever a line item you could remove?" Pierce leaned back and tried to soften his tone. He said, "Marin, you were never officially on it. You know that. Everything was set up early, before we were married, before things got complicated." My stomach dropped. Early, before we were married, as if the years I spent building the machine that kept his dream running were just background noise. I said, "I ran your operations for 7 years. I built the vendor system. I trained the staff. I fixed the mistakes you never even saw." Lorraine's mouth tightened. She said, "You helped. That is what wives do. They help." The word wife landed like a trap, like a definition meant to shrink me. I looked at Pierce again. "When did you do this?" Pierce said, "It started in October. We signed in December. It's clean now." Clean, the same word Lorraine used in the kitchen. I felt something cold spread through my chest. I said, "And you did not tell me?" Pierce shrugged, a small motion, almost apologetic. He said, "I knew it would upset you. That's why we wanted to talk calmly. No one wanted a scene." Lorraine said, "You have always been emotional about business. You take things personally." I wanted to laugh. I wanted to throw the folder across the room. Instead, I picked it up and opened it slowly, because my hands still knew how to work under pressure. Pages of terms, titles, signatures. I saw Pierce's name in ink, bold and confident. I saw Lorraine's signature as a witness. I saw Everett's signature too, steady, careful. His handwriting was familiar, the same one on every holiday card. My eyes moved down the page, looking for mine, even though I already knew it would not be there. It was not. I said, "So you all signed this, together?" Everett finally turned his head slightly, but his eyes did not meet mine. His gaze fell somewhere near my shoulder, like looking at my face would cost him something. Pierce said, "It was the correct step. It protects the company." I said, "From what? From me?" Pierce did not answer immediately. Lorraine did. From uncertainty. I felt my chest rise and fall, slow, controlled. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears, not fast, just heavy. I said, "You called it blurred authority. I called it partnership." Pierce rubbed his thumb against his wedding ring, a gesture I had always found comforting. Now it looked like a habit he used to steady himself, not to connect with me. He said, "Marin, I am not saying you did not contribute. I'm saying this is the structure we need going forward." Going forward, like I was not included in the future he was building. My voice came out quieter. "So what else did you restructure?" Pierce's eyes flicked to Lorraine. Lorraine lifted her chin. Pierce said, "There's also a separation agreement, temporary, just to give everyone space. It doesn't have to be ugly." I stared at him. Space from what? From my existence? Lorraine stood up, smoothing the front of her cardigan. She said, "This is for the best. If you sign today, you can avoid the mess. You can keep your dignity." Dignity, another word people use when they're trying to take something without admitting it. Pierce slid another document toward me. My name was typed neatly at the top, like a label on a box. He said, "It's standard, it's temporary, it just sets boundaries while we figure things out." I looked at the lines, the dates, the calm language that made betrayal sound like a scheduling change. I heard myself ask, very softly, "So I was never meant to stay?" No one answered. Pierce's jaw tightened. Lorraine's eyes moved away. Everett turned back to the window, as if the backyard required his full attention. The silence was so complete it felt deliberate. I picked up the pen. Not because I accepted their story, not because I agreed with their choices. I signed because I understood something in that moment that I had avoided for years. This was not a conversation, it was a conclusion. Pierce exhaled like he had been holding his breath. He said, "Thank you. I knew you would be reasonable." Reasonable, the word women are rewarded with right before they are erased. I stood up without shaking. I walked upstairs to the guest room and packed slowly, folding clothes the way I always did, careful, neat, as if order could keep me from falling apart. Before I left, I opened my suitcase and slipped in my old laptop, the one Pierce called outdated, the one I kept because it held years of files. I unplugged the small external hard drive from the side pocket of my bag, the one I used back when I ran everything, and I tucked it into my coat. Downstairs, Pierce held the door open like a gentleman. Lorraine said, "Drive safe." Everett did not speak. I stepped onto the porch and the cold hit my face like a slap. The neighborhood was quiet, flags hanging still, lawns trimmed even in winter. I walked to my car and put my bag in the trunk. When I sat in the driver's seat, my hands rested on the steering wheel, and for the first time since midnight, I let myself feel the full weight of it. They had done it legally, they had done it clean, and they expected that to be the end of the story. I started the engine and pulled away, watching the house shrink in my mirror until it was just another shape on a quiet street, as if it had never been mine to begin with.
Chapter 3. Silence became my strategy. That clarity followed me across the river and into a short-term apartment in Cambridge that smelled faintly of old books and lemon cleaner. It was the kind of place meant for people passing through, furnished but impersonal, a desk pressed against one wall, a narrow bed against the other, a window that looked out onto a brick courtyard where no one lingered. I arrived with 2 suitcases and a box of files I had pulled from the trunk of my car before I could change my mind. I set everything down and stood there for a long moment, listening to the hum of the radiator, letting the quiet settle. There was no one to impress here, no one to manage, no one watching how gracefully I handled being removed from my own life. I set my laptop on the desk and plugged it in. The screen flickered to life slowly, like it was waking up with me. This was the old one, the one Pierce said I should replace years ago. It held everything: drafts, emails, versions of plans that never made it into the final slide deck. Back when Northline Freight was still a name on a whiteboard, before it became a talking point at dinner parties. I opened my inbox and started with the oldest folders first, not because I was looking for revenge, but because I needed to understand when I stopped being visible. I sorted by year, then by sender. 2011, 2012, 2013, the early days when the company was just Pierce and me and a handful of drivers who trusted us because we paid them on time. I read slowly, not letting myself drift. Every thought stayed tied to the screen, to the words in front of me. If something made my chest tighten, I noted it and moved on. By mid-January, I had built a timeline on the desk with sticky notes and printed emails. I did not cry. I did not pace. I highlighted dates. I circled names. I treated my own erasure like a problem that needed solving. The first message from Pierce came while I was printing an old vendor agreement. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." That was all it said. I stared at my phone until the screen dimmed. Then I placed it face down and fed the next page into the printer. 2 days later, an email from Lorraine appeared in my inbox. Subject line, Grace. She wrote that she hoped I was taking time to reflect, that letting go with grace would serve everyone better, that clinging to the past only deepened wounds. She ended it with a line about family being more important than pride. I closed the message without replying. Grace was another word people used when they wanted silence to look like consent. The first person I called was Claire Monroe. We had not spoken in years, not since I stepped away from my role and let myself be absorbed into Pierce's shadow. Claire answered on the second ring. I said, "I need a mediation attorney, and I need one who will not talk down to me." She did not hesitate. She said, "Come in tomorrow. Bring everything." Her office was in a converted brownstone near Harvard Square, the kind of place where nothing was flashy, but everything worked. A desk pressed against one wall, a narrow bed against the other, a window that looked out onto a brick courtyard where no one lingered. She gestured to the chair across from her desk. "Tell me what happened." I told her the short version, the restructuring, the signatures, the separation agreement. I kept my voice steady. Claire listened without interrupting, only nodding occasionally, her pen moving across a legal pad. When I finished, she leaned back and said quietly, "They did this to keep control, not because you were wrong." I swallowed. I said, "It was done legally." Claire nodded. Legal does not mean ethical, and ethical does not mean enforceable. We look for leverage where the paper contradicts the story. She asked for dates. I gave them. She asked who drafted the early operating framework. I paused. I said, "I did." Claire's eyes lifted. "Then that matters." Back at the apartment, I dug deeper. I pulled the external hard drive from my coat pocket and plugged it in. The familiar folders appeared, organized the way I used to organize everything, by year, by function, by who could be trusted with access. Late one night, after the printer had warmed the room and the radiator knocked like it was keeping time, I found the email. It was from August 2012, sent from my address to Pierce's. Attached was a draft titled Operating Framework Version 3. In the body of the email, I had written that this version included spousal consent language for any change to controlling interest or signature authority. I had written that it protected both of us. I had written that it assumed good faith. I read it twice, then a third time. My name was there, my words, my logic. I sat back in the chair and let out a breath I did not realize I had been holding. The next call I made was to Naomi Reed. Naomi had been our senior accountant before she left to work for a regional firm. She was precise, cautious, and allergic to drama. She answered with a surprised laugh. "Marin, I was just thinking about you." We met at a small cafe near Central Square. Naomi arrived with a notebook and a guarded expression. She said, "I want to be careful here." I said, "I do too." I showed her the reports from Q4 2023. She scanned them, her brow furrowing. She said, This is not fraud, but it is sloppy. There are timing issues. Deferred expenses moved too cleanly. Someone wanted the books to look simpler than they were. I nodded. She looked at me and said, "You did not do this." I said, "I was not allowed to." She closed her notebook. Then that matters. By February, the desk in the apartment was covered in stacks of paper. I printed everything: emails, drafts, agreements, notes. I labeled each stack by year and function. I did not send copies. I did not confront anyone. I did not respond to Pierce or Lorraine. Silence was not surrender. It was focus. One afternoon, my phone buzzed again. "Pierce, please tell me you are not planning something." I stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back, "I am organizing my records." He did not reply. That night, I spread the documents across the floor and sat among them. I lined them up by date, watching the shape of the story emerge without me forcing it. It was there all along: the work, the planning, the assumptions they made about my compliance. I packed the papers into folders and slid them into a box. I labeled it simply, "Foundations." I taped it shut and set it by the door. Then I turned off the light, knowing I was done preparing for this part.
Chapter 4. When the Truth Entered the Room. That enough carried me into June, into a conference room that smelled like copier toner and lemon water, the kind of neutral space designed to drain emotion out of people. Mediation was supposed to be calm, controlled, professional, but the moment I walked in, I could feel the air tighten, like the room itself had been waiting for a collision. The building was in downtown Providence, chosen, I suspected, because it was halfway between my rented apartment and the life Pierce still occupied. Claire met me in the lobby. She looked composed, as always: navy blazer, hair pinned back, a folder tucked under her arm like it was part of her body. "You ready?" she asked. I nodded. "I am," I said, and I meant it in the only way that mattered. I had done the work. I had the paper. I had the timeline. I had stopped expecting anyone in Pierce's family to suddenly grow a conscience. We walked into the room together. Pierce was already there, sitting at the table with his attorney. He wore a light gray suit, like he was headed to a meeting with investors, not a mediation with the woman he had erased. His hair was neatly styled, his jaw clean-shaven, his expression carefully neutral. Lorraine sat beside him, upright as a statue. Her pearls were present, of course. She held a leather handbag on her lap as if it contained something sacred. Across the table sat Thomas Keller, the mediator. He was 52, with kind eyes and the practiced calm of a man who had heard everything and still believed people could behave. A legal pad sat in front of him, untouched. At the far end of the table sat Marcus Hale, the banking partner Pierce had been courting for months. Marcus was 50, broad-shouldered, quiet, with a face that never gave away what he was thinking. A slim laptop was open in front of him, and he glanced at me briefly, then back to the screen. Pierce's attorney stood as we entered, polite, professional. "Miss Caldwell," he said. I did not correct him. The last name no longer fit, but it still sat on my paperwork like a scar. Thomas Keller cleared his throat. "Thank you all for coming," he said. "The goal today is to find a resolution that avoids litigation. I am not a judge. I am not here to punish anyone. I am here to help you reach an agreement you can live with." Lorraine smiled, the kind of smile that made her look benevolent. "We all want peace," she said. Pierce nodded. "We followed the law," he added, as if that should end the conversation before it began. Thomas turned to me. "Miss Caldwell, do you want to start by sharing what you are hoping to accomplish today?" I kept my hands folded in front of me. My heart beat steadily, not because I felt calm, but because I had already spent my panic in January. "I want the truth on paper," I said, "and I want an agreement that reflects what I built, not just what I was allowed to sign." Pierce's attorney gave a small smile, almost amused. "With respect," he said, "the operating agreement speaks for itself. Ms. Caldwell was never a member of the LLC. The company was structured with clear authority. There is no dispute about signature rights." Lorraine turned her head toward me. "You were supported," she said, softly. "That should count for something." Claire's voice cut in, smooth and firm. "It does count. That is exactly why we are here." Thomas raised a hand. "Let's take it step by step," he said. "Mr. Caldwell, you have stated you followed the law. Miss Caldwell, you are stating there are facts not reflected in the current documents. Ms. Monroe, you have brought evidence. Let's review it." Claire opened her folder and slid a packet across the table to Thomas first, then to Pierce's attorney, then to Marcus. "This is a timeline of communications and drafts from 2011 through 2013. It includes the operating framework Ms. Caldwell drafted when the company was forming." Pierce's attorney flipped through the pages with a look of mild annoyance. "This is internal email, drafts, non-binding." Claire nodded. "Some of it is, yes, but not all." She turned a page and tapped a paragraph with her pen. "This clause addresses spousal consent in the event of a change in controlling interest or signature authority," she said. "It was included intentionally. It was acknowledged in writing by Mr. Caldwell." Pierce's eyes narrowed. "It was a draft," he said. Claire looked at him. "It was a draft you used as the backbone for your structure, and we have evidence you referenced it in later agreements." Thomas leaned forward. "Mr. Caldwell, did you sign any document that incorporated this framework or referenced it?" Pierce shifted in his chair. "We evolved, we updated. That is normal." Lorraine spoke again, her voice calm, almost soothing. "She is trying to complicate something that was handled properly. We did this to avoid chaos." Marcus lifted his gaze for the first time and looked directly at Lorraine. "Chaos is not what I worry about. Governance is." His voice was quiet, but it cut through the room like a blade. Pierce's attorney glanced at Marcus, then back to the papers. "We are not talking about governance," he said. "We are talking about a separation agreement." Marcus did not blink. "If my bank is considering financing an expansion, we are absolutely talking about governance." Claire slid another page forward. "And this is why." She placed a printed email in front of Thomas, date-stamped August 2012. It was my message to Pierce, the one I had read in my apartment, the one that made my hands stop shaking. Thomas read silently, his eyes moving slowly. Pierce's face tightened. Claire spoke gently, almost like she was narrating something too obvious to argue with. Miss Caldwell wrote in her own words that the spousal consent language was intended to protect both parties. Mr. Caldwell responded that he agreed. That is written acknowledgement. Pierce's attorney scoffed. "An email is not a contract." Claire nodded again, as if she had expected that. "No," she said, "but it is evidence of intent, and intent matters when a court evaluates equitable claims, especially when there is a pattern of reliance." Lorraine's mouth pressed into a thin line. "We are not in court," she said. Thomas tapped his pen once. "Not yet," he said. The room went quiet for a moment. I could hear the air conditioner click on. I could hear Pierce's watch against the table when he shifted his wrist. Then Thomas looked at Marcus. "Mr. Hale, you were invited as an observer due to the business implications. Do you have questions?" Marcus did not hesitate. "I do," he said. "Who ran operations from 2014 through 2020? Pierce answered quickly. "We had managers. It was a team." Marcus nodded slightly. "And who built the vendor system, the compliance process, the route standards?" Pierce's jaw worked. "Marin helped, early on." Lorraine added like she was correcting a child. "She supported the household so he could build the company." Marcus looked down at the papers again, then he looked at me. His voice softened, but it did not lose its edge. "I didn't know she built this." It was one sentence, that was all, but something shifted when he said it, as if the truth had finally entered the room and everyone had to make space for it. Pierce's attorney cleared his throat. "This is becoming emotional," he said. Marcus raised his eyebrows. "No," he replied, "this is becoming clear." Claire slid one more packet toward Thomas. "This is a summary of Q4 2023 reporting anomalies, not criminal fraud, but enough to raise questions about transparency. Ms. Reed, the former senior accountant, reviewed it and is prepared to attest." Pierce leaned forward. "That is ridiculous. Our books are clean." Claire met his eyes. "Clean is not the same as accurate," she said quietly. Lorraine turned toward Pierce. "We did nothing wrong," she said, her voice sharper now. Thomas lifted a hand again. "Everyone breathe. This is still mediation, but I need to be honest. When banking partners have concerns, it changes leverage. When there is written acknowledgement of reliance and contribution, it changes leverage." Pierce looked at his attorney, a quick flash of anger crossing his face before he forced it down. "What do you want?" he asked me, and for the first time his voice sounded less like a CEO and more like a man realizing he might not control the room. I kept my posture still. "I want recognition," I said, "and I want terms that reflect reality." Thomas exhaled slowly. "Here is my proposal. We pause the current draft of the separation agreement. We start over. We negotiate a settlement that addresses business contribution, financial equity, and future governance boundaries. If you cannot agree, this goes to litigation, and I suspect none of you want that." Pierce's attorney opened his mouth to argue. Lorraine sat rigid. Marcus watched without expression. Claire looked at me. I felt something inside me unclench, not joy, not victory, just a quiet sense that the ground had shifted under Pierce. I nodded once, and for the first time in a long time, I did not feel like I was asking to be seen. I felt like I was finally being acknowledged.
Chapter 5. Proof, not rage. Because I stopped holding it together, everything else finally settled into place. The settlement did not come with fireworks or a dramatic signing ceremony. It arrived the way most adult truths do, through email attachments, conference calls, and language so precise it left no room for interpretation. By early spring of 2025, it was done. The agreement recognized my role as a founding architect of the business, not just a supportive spouse. It granted me financial equity that reflected years of unpaid labor and strategic contribution. It outlined boundaries that could not be quietly crossed again. Pierce kept the company. That part surprised no one. Northline Logistics still carried his name on the website, his face in the press releases, his voice in the earnings calls. What he lost was harder to quantify and easier to feel. He no longer moved unchecked. Every major decision required review. Every expansion needed approval. Control, the thing he had guarded more fiercely than loyalty, now lived outside his hands. Lorraine did not attend the final call. Her attorney spoke for her, clipped and formal. When I saw her weeks later at a family event I almost did not attend, she looked smaller somehow, not weaker, just stripped of the certainty that had always wrapped around her like armor. She did not lecture me, she did not offer advice. She asked about the weather and commented on the food, and left early. That was her reckoning, quiet, public enough to be noticed, private enough to hurt. I moved into a modest townhouse outside Cambridge, close enough to the river that the air felt cleaner, far enough from my old life that it did not echo. I took on consulting work selectively, projects that valued process over posturing. I no longer explained gaps in my resume. I no longer softened my language to make other people comfortable. Most mornings I worked at the small desk near the window. Afternoons were for walks, for reading, for rebuilding habits I had given away in pieces. There was no urge to prove anything. The proof already existed. The first real moment of release came on a Tuesday evening when my phone rang and I saw Evelyn's name on the screen. She was 19 now, halfway through her first year of college, her voice still carrying the sharp edges of independence. "Mom," she said, "are you busy?" I smiled. "Never too busy for you." There was a pause, then a breath. "I need your opinion on something." The words landed heavier than any apology ever could. I listened as she talked through her dilemma, a class she was thinking of dropping, a decision she was afraid to make wrong. I did not interrupt. I did not fix it for her. When she finished, she waited. "What do you think?" she asked. I gave her my honest answer, not as a mother trying to steer her, but as a woman who respected her agency. When we hung up, I sat in the quiet and let the moment sink in. Being asked mattered more than being praised. Pierce and I spoke occasionally, only when necessary. Our conversations were polite, contained, transactional. He never apologized. He did not need to. The loss he experienced was not dramatic enough to make headlines, but it followed him everywhere. In boardrooms where people paused before agreeing, in meetings where questions lingered longer than they used to, in the subtle shift of power that comes when someone realizes they are no longer the smartest person in the room by default. I never took satisfaction in his discomfort. I took satisfaction in my own steadiness. There were days I replayed the early years in my head, wondering if I could have seen it sooner, stopped it earlier, spoken louder. But those questions faded as my life filled with things that did not require permission. The truth is, I did not win by taking anything from them. I won by taking myself back. If you are listening to this and you recognize that feeling, the one where your contribution has been folded into someone else's success and labeled support instead of substance, I want you to hear this clearly. Anger is understandable, rage is tempting, but neither is required. What matters is documentation, memory, the quiet discipline of keeping records when no one is watching, the courage to sit in silence long enough for patterns to reveal themselves. I did not shout, I did not threaten, I did not scorch the earth. I let the truth enter the room, and I trusted it to do the work. If you have ever been told to let go with grace when they really meant disappear quietly, know this. Grace does not mean compliance. It means knowing your worth without needing to announce it. If my story resonates with you, I invite you to stay, share your thoughts, tell me where you have been underestimated and how you chose to respond. There are more stories here, stories about rebuilding, about clarity, about choosing proof over rage. Sometimes the strongest ending isn't the one that makes the most noise, it's the one that finally feels like home.